Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So today I'm going to talk about healing your inner child and how this can be a valuable step in your recovery journey. So what do we mean by healing your inner child? What exactly does this mean? So inner child work is a process of recognizing, understanding, validating, and healing emotional wounds that you experienced in your childhood and that continue to unconsciously impact your adult life. Now, you might think, I don't have any issues, I don't have any kind of unresolved things, but if you are experiencing challenges in your adult relationships or with regulating your emotions, then it's highly likely that you have some inner child work to do. And it's true for most of us. And people often come into therapy and describe having a lovely childhood, and they genuinely mean this. And you may relate to this or not. I mean, perhaps you're acutely aware of some extremely difficult adverse childhood experiences. The memories powerfully infiltrate your consciousness daily. But what if you didn't experience big T traumas? So the big T traumas are things such as physical abuse or harmful neglect, the more obvious traumas. You might wonder why you're struggling with low mood, anxiety, or eating disorders or something else. You might think, well, I didn't experience any big T traumas. I had a lovely childhood. What is wrong with me? But it's extremely common for many people to have experienced the small T traumas though. And these can be hugely impactful and insidious. Things such as chronic criticism or lack of interest from a loved one, and the drip cumulative impact of being in an unhealthy environment, which doesn't encourage your flourishment and self-worth, can have devastating and long-standing effects. Now, I want to say this is not about blaming and demonizing parents, because it is a fact that your parents have likely lived through their own significant traumas with a little or no emotional support or mental health understanding. Now, particularly in the UK, the stiff upper lip of just get on with it, everything is fine, in the past collective consciousness has meant that many people carry unprocessed trauma that they have never acknowledged or dealt with. Instead, it sneakily leaks out daily as they repeat the patterns that are known and familiar. And in the past, a mental health diagnosis, it previously carried so much stigma and shame. I mean, it still carries shame today, sadly, but I think in the past there was so much stigma and shame. Back in the day, if anyone was struggling, they would likely be ostracized or labeled as the mad person, and families would do everything and anything to hide what was outwardly considered shameful and wrong. So it means that unless your parents were in the minority and received high quality, emotionally attuned parenting from their caregivers, or they've had a lot of personal therapy, it's almost a given that dysfunctional coping has been reliably passed through the generations. So inner child work involves an initial awareness and understanding of different ways in which your emotional needs may or may not have been met. And this work gives you the opportunity to process your feelings and to begin to consider how you can genuinely self-parent and meet these needs going forward. And it helps you interrupt old faulty coping patterns that feel familiar but lead you back into destructive cycles. So let's talk about some of the ways and conditions that are really helpful for a child to emotionally thrive. So things that children really need: a consistent and stable home environment where life is mostly calm and peaceful. For children, really, they like a boring, unpredictable life. They like to know what's happening. They like things to feel safe. They like to know that their caregivers are consistent and are present. So, of course, in every family, inevitable conflicts will arise. But if people can apologise in the main and repair the ruptures, this creates a strong sense of safety. Now, there is no such thing as perfect parenting, rather a good enough approach. But a child who receives good enough parenting feels seen, attuned to, validated, encouraged and supported as an individual, so independently of their achievements, how they look, etc. Also, to emotionally thrive as a child, it's helpful to have freedom to be a child who's spontaneous, silly, and playful without having to look after a parent or sibling and being overly responsible. It's really helpful to have space to express the full range of emotions and to feel heard. Emotions such as sadness or anger are listened to and tended to, not shut down or shamed by a significant adult. The parent supports the child to feel their feelings and to self-soothe. And also, to emotionally thrive as a child is feeling enough. Feeling enough just being you without having to achieve a specific grade or accolade to achieve your worthiness. So you might have received some of these things. You might recognize that there's many things that you haven't received. And I think most people in life will have received a mixture of the helpful and unhelpful. So you might look back on your childhood and have experienced some moments of really deep lovingness and connection, alongside the opposite of this happening too. You can still come from a loving family, but not have had your emotional needs met due to overwhelming and stressful family circumstances. So families are complex, messy, and imperfect. This is normal. And maybe your family environment was beneficial to your emotional development, but instead you experienced hostility and difficulties at school or in friendship. So it doesn't just have to be your family, but anything that we really lived through in the first 10 years of our life usually has a huge impact on our future and our adulthood. So let's talk about some of the ways in which your inner child can become wounded. So, an unsafe home or school environment with much chaos and unpredictability. So if you experience this, you'll be used to living in fear and will feel ready to flee the bear at any moment. Your nervous system baseline is mainly fight-flight. This might mean you experience a lot of daily anxiety and ruminate over worst possible scenarios. And if something joyful occurs, you fear it ending and dread for what's coming next. It's hard to trust in life. And you may have become hyper-independent as a coping strategy, or very clingy in your relationships as you don't feel safe in the world. The next one, moving house or schools at difficult times of life transition. So for some people, moving house or moving school could be a perfectly happy, peaceful, exciting experience. But if you moved house or school at a difficult time, maybe when there was a lot going on, maybe when you had a very strong friendship group in your old location, sometimes this can bring up a lot of issues. So you may have buried grief from friendships lost or changes that were out of your control at the time. You might have just never dealt with it. Maybe you became adept at people pleasing and masking your true self to fit in and avoid rejection. And you may have felt very unsafe in the transition, and this translated into a gnawing fear and uneasiness about life. The next one, parents being stressed or overly busy with little time for real connection. So if this happens, you probably learn to cope alone and internalize your feelings. So as a child, you might have developed coping strategies to manage things like obsessive little rituals, maybe having to have everything in its certain place in your room, maybe restrictive or emotional eating. Things as well like having to have things on an odd number or an even number, or just doing anything to control your environment to feel safe. You might as well find it hard to trust others and believe that they can meet your needs. And you might be drawn towards emotionally unavailable people in friendships and romantic relationships as this dynamic is familiar. Next one, a parent being overly critical and judgmental and not offering encouragement and validation. So if this has happened, you've probably internalized these high standards and have a strong inner critic and judge of yourself and others. So nothing ever feels good enough for you. You often feel worthless and incompetent, and you occasionally get glimmers of good enough from external validation, but this is never sustaining. You always need more. And you struggle maybe with low mood, anxiety, and poor self-worth as a result. The next one, a parent placing too much value on grades or outward achievements as a measure of worth rather than feeling loved for who you are. So in this case, you learned to ignore your inner desires and wants and twisted yourself to meet the world's approval. You might struggle with people pleasing or perfectionism, and the world doesn't feel safe, and you show a game face in relationships. And you feel very unseen and alone and fear rejection if you showed your real self. Okay, the next one, an unprocessed bereavement or loss in childhood. So maybe you lost a pet, maybe you lost a grandparent, and you may have not had time or support through the bereavement. If your parents were struggling, you might have really recognized that your parents were really upset, not coping, and you may have buried your feelings inside, not wanting to cause more stress. So unacknowledged grief can be a heavy, weary burden on your body. It can leak out in unsurprising ways and hang like a heavy cloud in your consciousness. And you may fear getting close to others if you lost a significant person in your life, as you fear further loss. The next one, a parent being envious of you. This can also be a sibling as well. A difficult one to discuss, as it evokes Wicked Queen and Snow White references, which humans generally don't wish to emulate, at least consciously. I think none of us want to feel that we're envious of someone, particularly if it's someone in our family. But a parent's envy can leave you confused and ashamed, and you might fear stepping into your light and joy, and you don't wish to evoke any negative reaction and feel guilty for showing up in your full power. Another one, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. Now, abuse is a violation to the body and soul and can have devastating consequences for your mental well-being and development. So it's highly likely that you will have an extremely fear-based approach to life, and it'll be challenging to feel safe and to trust in other humans. And you may love and or despise the person that abused you, whilst also feeling rage and hurt about what happened, and possibly even deep compassion for their vulnerability and brokenness. Now, it can be a complex emotional landscape to navigate. And I think as well, it's very, very individual. I think there is no right way to feel, and however you feel, that is valid. You might also experience issues around emotional regulation, and you may be very disconnected from your body. You might even sort of dissociate from your feelings. So your individual experience will be unique, and all the feelings that you bring and hold are valid. And if I haven't mentioned a scenario from your childhood that you relate to, please include your experience also. And the examples mentioned only offer a surface view into issues that can be infinitely more complex. So I just really want to validate that. So how to heal your inner child? Firstly, acknowledge and show understanding. The first step is to bring the unresolved issues into awareness. It involves naming the past things that happened and giving yourself a voice. This can be done in therapy, talking to a trusted friend, somatic work, journaling, or self-reflection. It involves a recognition about how these issues are now impacting your present-day emotions, behaviours, and relationships. So, for example, if you had a parent who was always working and never spent quality time with you, you might be drawn towards emotionally unavailable people today, as this feels familiar. And maybe you're always pursuing attention from those who cannot give it to you, and then feeling as though you are never enough. If you're always valued for your appearance, you may feel a pressure to be perfect and to manipulate your body shape to gain approval and acceptance from others. The next step is reparenting. Once you recognise your unmet needs, you can begin to offer yourself the emotional support, care and understanding that you may not have received from your parents or caregivers. And this might include things like offering yourself validation, compassion and kindness, allowing yourself time to rest and slow down, nurturing yourself by doing the things that you love for sheer enjoyment, for example, reading, dance, music, art or something else, challenging negative thoughts or practicing mindfulness, self-soothing techniques such as breathing, grounding and meditation, engaging with emotional freedom technique, yoga or alternative therapies, visualization and journaling, having therapy, coaching or some other form of personal development work, and developing and nurturing authentic relationships where you feel accepted and can be vulnerable. Healing. By getting in touch with buried emotions and needs, you can begin to process and release trauma and deep wounding. Through this, you will foster a sense of safety, self-esteem, and inner resilience within yourself. So why take the time to heal your inner child? Well, our past relationships impact the present. So your childhood experiences will be repeated unconsciously in your adult relationships if you don't do the healing work. And this can cause significant frustration and pain. And I think this is sometimes very hard to get your head around because of consciously, you can really not want to repeat old patterns, but unconsciously, the unconscious will often rule the show. And unless you do the inner work, you will just end up repeating these old frustrating cycles. Next one, emotional regulation. Unprocessed emotions from the past will leak out in your present reality. So you'll find it challenging to manage stress and to regulate your feelings well without healing. So a good example of this could be someone who seems to always be having sort of anger outbursts, which feel really over the top and disproportionate to what's happening in the present. Someone who is often having angry outbursts like that has probably got something from their childhood, some anger that was never expressed from their early relationships. So it's kind of like being reactivated, it's leaking out, it's being expressed in the present because it hasn't been healed. Now, if you struggle with your emotions, you will likely rely on food, alcohol, drugs, overwork, or other coping to avoid your emotions. And these strategies do not work effectively for your mental health long term. Okay, they obviously can bring relief in the short term, but for the long term, they often lead to a lot of kind of other issues. And self-worth and self-compassion. You will develop a stronger sense of self-worth and self-acceptance. Your inner critic will soften and you will develop substantial realms of compassion and self-kindness. You will rely far less on the approval of others and will obtain an internal sense of peace and well-being. So overall, doing inner child work will vastly improve mental well-being. You will source a deeper sense of peace and inner contentment, this being a life-giving and supportive internal resource that you can carry with you daily. It's so worth it. So have you practiced inner child work? I'd love to hear from you. Do let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for listening today. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out, the Eating Disorder Therapist _. For further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you enjoy this podcast, I'll be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. And if you would like to receive written versions of the podcast, please subscribe to my Substack. The link is in the show notes. Or if you put into Google Harriet Frew Substack, it will also take you there. Thank you so much for listening today and for supporting this podcast. I really appreciate you. And I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.